All right. Well, we are live. I'm Brian Ensminger. I'm the host of the Engaging Missions Show, and today we're going to be joined by Scott McClelland. I'll introduce him in just a second. We are going to be talking primarily about William Carey and his influence in leadership and how that's impacted Scott's life. But before we do that, I just want to say, for those of you who are joining us live, welcome. It's great to have you here. If you have any comments, you can definitely leave those in the comments section. And of course, because we're driven by love and all that stuff, likes and hearts and shares and all that stuff would be great. Just kidding. But we would love to have those, especially if you have a question or a comment that you think is relevant to the conversation. I would encourage you to put that in the comments so that we can make that part of our discussion, because with you here interacting with us, we think this is going to be better than if it was just he and me. And then just as a just to let you know, the plan is for us to publish this in the next week or so as a bonus episode of the Engaging Missions Show. So you might be here for our first ever live taping of the Engaging Missions Show on Facebook. Before we get started, I did want to take a minute just to acknowledge the reality that there was a bombing today. We're recording this the night of Easter, and there was a bombing today in Sri Lanka. And I just want to acknowledge that, because our brothers and sisters right now, I would say that they do need our prayers, and it can be easy for me to, sitting here relatively safe, to try to tell people how to think or how to feel about this. And I don't want to do that. The only thing is, I was thinking about this today, that I want to remind myself and remind us is that the word says that precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. And so if you're in a place right now where you're wondering if God does care or if God noticed this, the word says that he does, and we can take faith in that. One other thing that I wanted to do before we introduce Scott is share an article. And I'm going to drop the link into the comments, and it'll be in the show notes as well. Just for some conversation, because it was Kristen sent this to me on Facebook, and it's an article from the recent Frontier Missions magazine. It's available online. I've just dropped a link in the comments, and there were a couple of articles in there specifically that I thought would be relevant for the church, especially church leaders who are thinking about growth and who are thinking about discipleship and multiplication. And it asked a couple of hard questions. And one of the questions that it asked that I kind of struggled with, and I want to kind of give this to you as a point of consideration, is the question, how do you inoculate someone against a disease, against a virus? You do that by giving them a weakened form of the virus. And he asked the same question, how do we inoculate a culture against Christianity? And the question I would ask you is, first, if you think about your church or the people that you're connected with, is there some level of inoculation going on with the people around you, perhaps in your life or perhaps in people that you know? And if that's the case, I'd just like to offer also the encouragement that if God is bringing this to light in my life and in our lives, then I believe that he has a desire to correct that, and he is able to do that kind of stuff. So I would just encourage you, take a look at the article, see what you think about it. And if you have any comments about that, please feel free to leave those. Now we're going to be joined on Skype by Scott McClelland. And I'm going to go ahead and bring it up, even though we weren't able to get an image today, but we're joined by Scott McClelland. He is the founder or the co-founder of FXMissions. He's the host of the Leadership Moment podcast, as well as From the Forefront. He's a businessman and a business missions leader, and he's now working on a book on leadership, and he's joining us to talk about the leadership of William Carey and how that's impacted his life. So, Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Brian. Appreciate you having me on, and it's good to be here again with you and kind of in this new format. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and it's great to have you. I think this is probably the fourth or fifth time you've appeared on the show in some form, other than the segments that you did for a while. So it's great to connect with you.
Yeah.
As I think about William Carey, I guess the first question I would have is, why did William Carey come to mind when you thought about profiling leaders?
Well, when I think about leadership, I think about folks who kind of were initiators, or maybe people who did something for the first time, or for the first time in a long time. So William Carey is certainly that kind of person. No one ever told me, hey, check out William Carey. I wish they had, because it took me a long time to find out about him. So I thought he's an interesting guy from a mission standpoint, and I think there's a lot instructive about his life as well.
That's cool. So as you think about his life, what is instructive to you from a leadership perspective?
Well, we got a timeline on this show.
Yes, we
I
do.
won't go too long, but I think he's kind of an unlikely character, if you will. Just a little bit about his background. In a lot of ways, I think he's referred to as the father of modern missions, but it's kind of probably was super unlikely that he would be characterized that way. He was born in rural England in the 1700s. His folks were weavers. They were tradesmen. They were simple folk, and he was born to them. He was an inquisitive young guy, and had a lot of capacity in the languages side. So he had some stuff on board that the Lord had put inside of him, but he was kind of an unlikely character. At 14, he was apprenticed to a shoemaker. So he started out making shoes or working for a guy who made shoes. And interestingly, at 14, and during that time as he was apprenticed, he taught himself Greek. So we start to see some little glimmers of light there in this guy, but he's just so unlikely to me because he was born into the Church of England, a very super institutionalized structure at the time. It was pretty unlikely he was going to do much, besides be a good parishioner, and of course he did more than that. It's just fascinating to me that not only did he do some things that were never done before him, maybe never done since in the same way, but he just doesn't seem to be contained by his surroundings well. And I hope for myself that I hope that when he and I sit down in the kingdom of heaven, I get to ask him, hey, how'd I do compared to not obeying my surroundings? Well, I hope I can be like him in that way.
And do you see any parallels between your life and his?
Not yet. Well, I don't have the aptitude for languages that he had, and I think he was a really, really smart guy. But I think one of the things that happened early on to him, I think, and this would be maybe some parallel, when he was apprenticed to this shoemaker and became a shoemaker or trainee or whatever, he came in contact for the first time with a guy who was a dissenter. I don't know if you know what I mean when I say dissenter, but
go ahead and explain it.
Dissenter in this context would be someone who dissented against the Church of England, which was the state church of the time in his world. So the Church of England was the church, and he came in contact with a guy who, had some different beliefs, was another apprentice, and so he was stirred by this guy, and went in kind of a different direction from his progenitors, from those who had fathered him. And so he took a big turn as a young man. He got married early. I have that in common. He got baptized and committed as a believer. Of course, now this was rebaptized, not an infant baptism or whatever was going on in the Church of England at the time. And he got really serious about his faith at the age of 22. So we have some things in common. I was getting serious about my faith in my late teens. So, got kind of an early start there. but he did some crazy stuff. I mean, there was no mission societies like we have now all around us, really. There was nothing like that in his day. And he founded the Baptist Missionary Society. I think they call it something else now, but it's still around. And he founded that right after he wrote a missionary manifesto, which has a very long title. But you can you want to find out about William Carey in general, you can do that on I think there's a good bit of him on Wikipedia, and I've also listened to and read some stuff about his life. But really interesting guy, because he stepped out and created a context that didn't exist. And what kind of courage did that take?
Yeah.
I applaud that for sure.
Cool. So you're looking also for something back from the people who have joined us, either joined us live or who are listening later. And can you share with us what you're working on and what we can do to help be part of that?
Yeah, we are. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for creating this context. We're working on a project on profiles in leadership, and just trying to get a feel for who is it that has inspired you, or who maybe has challenged you in the area of leadership. Who is it that you encountered as a leader, or you learned about their life and you said, wow, that was meaningful, impactful, and was instructive to your own life. I'm trying to get those kind of examples, both from the Old Testament and the New Testament, captive audiences, obviously, and also from history. I'm trying to get some feedback because we're working on this project for profiles in leadership. I want to know who inspires who and why. So you don't have to write a book on it, or even a chapter, or even anything lengthy, but I just like to capture some feedback about a leader or leaders in your life, both, even living now in history, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. Who inspired you? What was inspiring about them? How did it impact your life? That's what I'm looking for.
Okay. And if people want to provide that feedback to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can. I mean, we're kind of out there on the social media channels. Probably the easiest way would be by email.
Okay.
And like LM, as in leadership moment, LM at FXMissions.com. Also, we're FXMissions.com on Facebook, or a lot of these other venues for social media. But yeah, we'd love to get an email or get a message from you about who inspired you, who is currently inspiring you, who's challenging you, who's making you reconsider your courage or bravery.
Yeah, and so I just dropped that email address there in the comments. It'll be in the show notes as well. So if you have a leader that you'd like for Scott to consider as a profile for leadership, I'd encourage you to take a minute to shoot that. That's lm at fxmissions.com. Scott, anything else before we sign off?
Well, thanks again for having me here. If you don't know about William Carey, I really recommend that you dig into him. He translated the Bible into a whole bunch of languages. He spent really the remainder of his life in India as a missionary, and kind of paved, where there was no paved road. It was totally out there in the wild getting it done. He's a very, very encouraging character. And thanks for giving me a chance to talk a little bit about William Carey. Thanks a lot for all your efforts, Brian, as always. Appreciate it.
Sure thing, and thank you. For those of you that have joined us and those that will be watching or listening in the future, I'd just like to ask you one more thing. Definitely go ahead and reach out to Scott, but one more thing I'd like to ask of you, and that's, we're trying this out as an experiment. It's something that I wanted to try to see if it resonated with you, if it adds you value. I would like to hear from you whether or not you like this kind of thing. If you want some of these shorter episodes every once in a while talking about resources or something that maybe doesn't get a full episode, I'd like a little bit of feedback from you about whether or not that makes sense to you, if you like the live format or not. If you could send that to feedback at engagingmissions.com or just hit me up on social media, I'd say a huge thank you for that. Huge thanks to Scott for joining us, and for anybody that happened to join us live or will be listening in the future. It was great to have you here. So long, and we'll talk to you soon.